And good morning to all of you, and welcome to this new era here. We're going into the second century here, 201, and we actually ironically begin at John chapter 16, verse 1. And here we go. So let's continue on. I won't say anything other than that. By way of review, this slide. Last time we looked at lenses and knives. We proposed that our default mode as human beings is to use the knife and use it primarily for separation. This is the idea. We apply the knife in order to separate the whole into pieces so that we can understand those pieces. That's where the knife is generally used. We do. Here's what I wrote. I got ahead of myself. To do so, it's driven by the need to understand, because that's part of being human, which tends towards the need to acquire or maintain control. That's where it goes south. Certainly, we want to understand, but I look at selfness or away from life would be this need to either acquire control or maintain control. Control is a big deal. And I think that that's integral as far as our human being, because we need control so we don't feel like we're out of control. We also propose that Jesus is providing a different way of seeing. There's where the lenses come in, knives, lenses. And lenses represent metaphorically a new set of eyeglasses that he is providing. In this regard, the knife is to remain. We need distinction. We need separation in order to define. That's what makes the world go round. But how do we use this? And he's suggesting that we use the knife in a different way. Good morning, Carl. The difference, according to Jesus, is outcome. According to Jesus, the intended outcome is a bringing together, which he's going to call in chapter 17 oneness. I'm not taking Jesus anywhere. He's taking us somewhere. Oneness versus our default human mode of separation. So there is a oneness that he's leading us to. There's a separation, which is the default human need. That's what this is all last time. So we have lenses and we have knives. Here's some pictures. And then last time we talked about, as being followers, how do we apply this kind of thinking according to the original intent of oneness, moving together. So that's what last week was about. We move on to 3 verses, chapter 16, 1 through 3, and it reads, "These things I have spoken to you so that you will not be led into sin." Now, well, I won't say anything because I'll refer to it in a minute. "They will ban you from the synagogue," Jesus says, yet an hour is coming for everyone who kills you to think that he is offering a service to God. This is not good news. These things they will do because they have not known the Father." There's the text. Let's dive in. First of all, we need to be reminded that chapter 16 is a continuance of chapters 14 and 15, and that it's all about preparing his disciples for his leaving, the coming of the Helper, and what that will all mean for them in the immediate future. It's a preparatory kind of monologue that sometimes moves into dialogue through questioning. So we need to keep that in mind. He's not pulling stuff out of his hip pocket. He's talking about a focused idea, and that's it. He has stated that there will be conflict. Yep, that's pretty apparent. And that the disciples will be hated by some people. And those who hate have what he calls sin, which means, okay, I say, he says they have sin. I clarified that. From my perspective, it means they will be motivated by sin. The reason I say that is because our human propensity in how we look at scripture, we tend to, conscious or unconscious, look for the good guys and the bad guys. Oh, these are sinners, that's why they're doing that. No, they're motivated by sin, and sin is part of being human. And that's what's motivating the hate. So I identified that I'm tying that phrase into week 199, verses 15, 20 through 25. And that's when we talked about they have sin. That does not mean they are in any different place as having some sort of disease, dirty disease that the rest of human nature doesn't have. No, they're motivated by something that is there and can be what do you call it, propagated through any of us. Here, he directs his followers to not get sucked into hate. He says, I'm saying this so that you will not be led into sin. This is why, because they're as prone as anybody else. He continues to explain what hate looks like, followed by the reason this will occur. This is all introductory. So let's first of all tie verse 1. These things I have spoken to you that you will not be led into sin. Let's talk about how I understand sin. You may understand it differently. This is how I understand the idea of sin. Jesus is talking about a destructive way of thinking, which leads to destructive choices and actions towards others. Hate. That's how I view hate. It's when our mind starts to get super active. It's common for people to think about sin as missing the mark. I mean, that's like Sunday school 101. We've all taught, oh, hey, Bill, I see that hand. Go ahead.
Of course, I have the nearly inspired version, but the word they use is, I've told you this so you will not fall away. I don't know if that gives light on the idea of sin or not.
Huh. I don't know. I haven't looked into the Greek. I don't know. I don't know. Led away and sin. John, go ahead.
Yeah, just what translation are you using?
What?
In the mic, right?
What translation are you using, Mike?
Oh, me. This is New American Standard. It's not, that's a whole subject in itself. I'm not a super fan of it, but I was raised on it. And I want to maintain a cohesion throughout it. So I use that as kind of a default mode. So there, we could go get into translations, but I think it, falling away and missing the mark, the idea of sin could be correlated. So that's maybe just think about that.
My little handy dandy iPhone version has these options. The one's called the literal translation, Young's literal translation, which I never use. They use the word that should not be stumbled. So they all kind of tumble around the same theme. I mean, sin, fall away, stumbling. That's an interesting mix of words.
Yeah. You know, the way I view it is there is a truth. And Jesus references to the Father of truth, the Spirit of truth. There is what is in actuality, and there is that which is not, which is what we create in our heads. That would be what leads to sin from my think of a bullseye. You got the bullseye, that's life, that's true. And the other marks outside of that is what I create, manufacture in my head, and I act on that, and that creates sin. That is really how a very basic model of how I think. So whether we stumble, whether we miss the mark, whether we be led away from the bullseye, I think we're all kind of talking about the same kind of thing. It's certainly not this evil disease that some people have and some people don't have. I think we choose to sin or we choose not to sin through our choices. So missing the mark. Okay, we're moving on. So I've got some points here of how I understand sin, and it's a progression. So at least you'll be able to understand how I'm thinking. To miss the mark, I picked up on this idea that's pretty commonly held. To miss the mark first means to build a construct of thinking, a framework of thinking in my head, which is fueled by self-protecting possibilities. Remember a few weeks ago, we talked about possibilities and substance. You know, I tend to create this stuff in my head, and it's all motivated about my own self-preservation. And they're just possibilities. They're not realities, they're possibilities. And this is all going on in my head. That's how I'm looking at the beginning of sin. Note, okay, now we got to make a note here, because there's a distinction between self-created need and legitimate need. If I need a drink of water, I need a drink of water for survival, and that is absolutely true. The problem is that we create stuff in our heads that are not true. And that is part of being our human condition. So there's legitimate need and self-created need. It'd be a great idea as my mind is going, how much of this is real, and how much of it is manufactured. That'd be a good idea. I'll tell you what, in the evenings, I'm tired and my head just goes in all kinds of directions. The evening is my rough time. It's not a struggle because I recognize it and I go, just put it away. Just don't even go there tonight. Get a rest. And I've learned to recognize that. Number two, what I create in my mind leads me down my own self-created choice path. So if I start taking action on what I've created in my head, these falsities, I start moving down a path, and I'm using the metaphor of a path. And that path is something I've created, not others. This path leads me away from what is actually true. There's the bullseye, Bill. I'm creating this path. It's moving me down this destructive away from what is actually true.
So that fits. Yeah, that fits fall away pretty nicely.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. So I'm moving south. When I say south, that's what I mean. So number 4, and this drives me to life choices which are based on what is true. So it's like almost like a snowball effect. I start moving down this path and I add this and I add this, and he said, she said, they said, all of this stuff that it's just in my head. And it really starts to go, it really starts to move away from reality. And so number 5 is the thus. The thus is, this is how I miss the mark, the bullseye on the target, because I'm creating, I have the power to hit the bullseye, but I'm not, because I want to go somewhere else in my head. That's the idea. And finally, thus I sin. This is how I understand the moving of the sin process within all of our lives. And Jesus is talking to the disciples. He says, I don't want you guys to get sucked into this. So that's verse 1. Verse 2 Jesus gives 2 examples of what to expect. They will ban you from the synagogue, yet an hour is coming for everyone who kills you. He just kind of goes over that, but man, that would be disturbing if I were there. They're going to kill us. To think that he is, I think he's making the emphasis on there is harm. Hate does this towards you. You're going to be the target of this. And the point is people actually thinking they're doing it in the name of God. Boy, does this sound familiar. Woo! So you can expect, disciple, he's saying, 2 things. The they are those who hate. It's not blanket those people outside the 12. It's they are those who are going to hate you. And that's according to the text. 2 things. 2 things. 1, they will ban you from relationship. That's the whole synagogue thing. They're going to keep you out of the synagogue, and they're going to close when you walk in. You're going to be asked to leave. And then secondly, they could actually attempt to take your life. Now, I think this can be done actually, and I think this can be done metaphorically. I think when you and I turn our hearts away from other people, we are withholding relationship. I think we can, as we speak ill of other people, we call it gossip, or hold destructive opinions of other people, we are actually killing them in their ability to function. Dave, you've got a comment.
Yeah, I just keep thinking about how much this sounds like Columbia University right now.
And I am not, I am totally in the dark. Sorry.
All the anti-Semitic activities that's going on, and it, one leads to another, and it boils and it boils and it stirs and it simmers, and so now you have these masses of hating people.
Yeah, there really is an extrapolation of what takes place.
Yeah.
When you fight fire with fire, all you get is fire, more fire. Yep. Thanks, Dave. Bill.
Well, it's sort of, and what Dave says, it's the 2 sides to it. There's the people who want to diminish the one side, Palestinian, other people want to diminish the Jews. But whatever happens, I think step 1 has to happen first. You have to get them cut out of your life and diminish them, somehow dehumanize the people.
Yeah.
And then that gives you permission to kill them because they're not really human. And it's like like when they went into Vietnam, they dehumanized them. They were gooks. Okay, kill the gooks, or they're blacks, they're ends. But there's a stage has to happen. You can't. Nobody is comfortable killing someone who is in your tribe.
Yeah.
And so you got to detribe them, and then you kind of have a freedom there that's pretty scary.
That's so true. That is absolutely true. I think of Tatsi, the Japanese, on how they were depicted during. I remember watching Popeye cartoons as a kid, and how Asian American, Japanese people were depicted, and it's horrific. I mean, we look at those today, you go, God, what in the world? I mean, we can recognize it today, but you couldn't recognize it then. But that's exactly what the Japanese people, it was an attempt to dehumanize. Yeah, exactly. So anyway, Hitler during World War II, same. Oh, guys, we could give example after example. How about the Baptist view of the Catholic, or even the conservative fundamentalist view of the Catholic. I mean, you got the same idea. It's part of it, part of the deal. So anyway, Jesus is talking about this very thing right now. And what is so horrible in this whole deal is that they who hate, do so thinking they are actually pleasing God. That is mind-boggling, but it is so true, and I'm guilty of it. I'm guilty of it. You know, the stuff I would think. And this is the dilemma people within the faith community. I'm bringing it not as the they out there, but I'm bringing it into the very communities that we interact with, the faith community. We find that they find themselves or ourselves. There is a shunning, and there is a downright violence. There are perpetrators and there are victims. And that, of course, why those two groups? Because of the need to dehumanize. If I can dehumanize, then I can control it and get what I want. It's really sad. But I didn't bring it up. Jesus did. He's talking about it. Okay, the why, verse 3, these things they will do, what he just said in verse 2, because here's the reason, here's the why. They have not known the Father nor me. Now, again, this is a loaded phrase of how each of us have, been kind of raised and cut our teeth on. There is a knowing of the Father that comes through a one-time prayer that we pray, and that we then are kind of brought into this thing called the believing community. I am not a holder of that position. I think it's really great to have a one-time thing and a second and a third and a fourth. It's a matter of the now. These people are not allowing themselves to know the Father through their own constructs of thinking. It's not a one-time in or out. It's not a black hat or a white hat subject here. They have not known the Father because they have not let go of their own self-created construct, this hate. What I mean by this is a story. They're actually creating a story in their heads. They manufacture this story, and it's entirely from the components or the pieces that they choose. It's like they have a puzzle and they're putting the pieces together the way they want those pieces put together, the way their mind is directing them, or the larger group, the group think, and it's creating absolute chaos. Some of these pieces are correct. Some of these pieces are really incorrect, and it's mostly a mixed response. That's what's so subtle about being human, is that when we speak, there is some truth and there is some untruth, and it muddles together to create havoc. And that is what's happening here. They don't know the Father. Note, the only way, this is something we're going to talk about in a minute. The only way to know anything at all, is to first let go of what I think. Man, I think if we could really get our heads around that. I'm in a conflict with my spouse, Sandra, and if I have caught myself thousands of, well, no, I'm not that good. A few times, I'm catching myself more and more about not prejudging or pre-anticipating what is about to be said, but rather taking more of a listener position and actually try to listen before I speak. Isn't that novel? I might learn something. Okay, this is where I get to read from myself and Mike Hamill's book. B&B is birth, not behavior. And so I'm going to take the liberty to read about how we talk about this very subject within within our book called Birth, Not Behavior. Have you guys heard of that book? You know, it's really all right. So bear with me and let me humor me and let me read. Okay. This is out of chapter 2 of the book, and it's where the youngest son, Lev, he takes his inheritance and he goes away, and he's finding out it doesn't work. And he says, it says in the text, he comes to his senses to come home. And he manufactures a reality in his head, and he creates a whole story that when he comes home and meets his father, he's going to say this. This is all in his head. Nobody's told it to him. And because he thinks all he wants is to get back home so he can become a hired servant of his father, he has no inkling, no grid for even considering the fact that he could be restored to full sonship. Because he's created the father as he's created the father in his head. And so we talk about that in our book. This line of thinking reveals what we call a governor. Lev had created in his mind that limited his relationship with his father. We're using the word in a mechanical sense. A governor is a device for limiting how fast an engine can go. It was initially designed as a safety feature to restrict an engine's RPM, revolutions per minute, and its overall speed. Imagine having a governor in your car that's set at 35 miles per hour. Your engine has a lot more horsepower, but you can't utilize it. The speed limit on the interstate is 75 miles per hour, but you can't reach it because of the governor. Now let's correlate that. Lev's governor was the idea that his father would treat him as his behavior deserved. He had cashed out his birthright as a son and spent it on selfish and reckless living. Now the most he could hope for was to be a common laborer. This governing idea was reinforced by feelings of guilt and shame, guilt at being disobedient and delinquent, and shame at what he had become. He was broke, dirty, hungry, alone, and it was all his fault. Many of us have wrong or limiting ideas about ourselves and God that act as governors and hinder our relationship with him. We admittedly say that we live by grace. Oh, we're big on grace. That's me. But how we react daily is quite different. If you question this contradiction, consider an example. When you sin, let's assume you do, what goes through your head regarding how you think God sees you? Is he frowning? Is he disappointed? On the other hand, when you're living as you think you should, is God smiling? Have your actions made him happy? It might be a good idea to call a timeout and ask yourself, how is it I think about how God thinks about me? I love that little phrase. Your governor is the unstated belief that you have to earn grace somehow. Talk about an oxymoron. So that's how we end that. And then we have another section. So that is there's where we talk about governors, and Jesus is talking about the governor that is created when people hate. And this is what that governor does. It's super destructive. So let's go to table time. Oh man, we got 30 minutes. That's so cool. Within session 201, I made this statement. To know anything, I must first let go of what I think. That's I'd really like for us to talk about that. And we'd like to know your thoughts. We all would like to know your thoughts. So let's talk about it. You're free to say whatever you want to say. To degree, what degree do you think this is true? That we have to let go of something in order to learn. I have to let go first. To what degree do you think that's true? Or where maybe would that be true and not true? Can you think of an example where you have experienced a letting go of something in order to see differently? Boy, Jeff, I'm thinking about you and what you've been through this week with all of the issues. And you're exemplifying this morning a really healthy way to look at. You're seeing a different perspective, and it's refreshing. Thank you. Whoa, I guess that was my last question. So let's go back to here, and I'd like to hear. Sterling's already got a comment. That's cool. Let me go ahead, Sterling, and talk while I'm.
Well, I think when you were introducing sin, you indicated it's how our sin affects other people. But when I think of my sin, I know it's I'm the one who's really the worse off. When I hate, it's bad for me.
Yeah.
So I think obviously this scripture is not about that idea. But as you went through and talked about things, it was still about you were still kind of on the edge of saying that. But I do think we have to kind of keep that in mind. But just for me, on the table time question, it just happened to me recently where Mike met my friend Anna, who lives here. She's a young girl in her late 30s, and she's really aggressive. And she, a couple of weeks ago, she just said some things that were just mean towards me and towards some other people. And I was just like, oh my gosh. And I've been trying to really be influential towards her. She has this really aggressive attitude, kind of always has to be right. And I'm like, just give people grace, and she gets worked up about stuff. And so I really have I did let it go, with this question experience, letting go of something and in order to see it differently. And yeah, I let go of that and have given her total grace, and even have shown her kindness in a couple of different ways. And the details of that aren't really important, but I did. Yeah, I totally had to, because I could have gone back at her pretty aggressive and been like, what in the world? That was just, I'm eventually going to talk to her, but in a more calm setting. And so yeah, anyway, that's my little table time.
Can I ask you some questions to talk about more? It's a great example. Thank you. Having made those choices that that path that you're on, you did so because of your faith, something's driving you bigger. You chose the default mode would be say, get out of my life, or you wouldn't say that, but just you shun that individual. You cut the relationship because it's too painful. You chose a different path, and you've explained that. What does that feel like inside of Sterling to do that?
Yeah, well, good question there. And I almost did take the path of shunning her from my life. I did consider that because it wasn't the first time that she'd kind of been aggressive. It's not only me, it's how she treats a lot of people. And, you know, I keep on trying to help her out with this, but for me, yeah, of course I don't know, there's a inner, I guess I'm pleased with myself that I did take the better path. So there is something there, but it was totally faith driven. I was being very mindful of what I was doing, and I was pleased with how I dealt with it for sure. I
That-
don't know if that's exactly what you were looking for.
Well, I'm not looking for anything other than for you, Sterling, to tell us a little bit more of what you're feeling. Because
Well, again, yeah, I'm gonna go back to what I said earlier about the sin. If I had reacted, you know, aggressively and negatively back towards her, it would have only in the end been bad for me. And so yeah, what's the result of, you know, really living by the, you know, the fruits of the Holy Spirit is that it's a much better life.
Yeah.
For me.
it,
And
yeah, I think we all agree. And I've got one more question. There's a couple other hands up, but I want to, while we're on Sterling, and I'm not picking on you at all, Sterling. You brought a great example.
it's good.
You mentioned that you had planned to talk to her in the future. Tell us more about why you would want to talk to her about this.
Well, I think it is, you know, trying to pour my faith out to her and to see if I can be influential. And she's open to faith. And yeah, I think that would be my hope, is to see how I can, you know, influence her in a positive way for her sake.
Yeah, good. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for stepping out there and sharing with us. That was a really great story. Vince, you're on the upper left corner of my screen, so you get to go first. And then Jeff.
When you were talking about governors, I was thinking of strongholds. It's another way of saying it, I suppose. And I went to, I have a torn rotator cuff. It's just, you know, wore out. And I go to a physical therapist and get, you know, various exercises and whatever's to treat that condition. And I made mention to the physical therapist. I said, well, there are just some activities that are I just got to wave goodbye to. I just, you know, I'm 74 and I'm not going to be putting the cinder blocks on the top shelf in my garage anymore. It's just not there.
Yeah.
And she said, well, you know, life is what it is, but I wouldn't say that out loud. And I thought she was joking. I've been like, you know, is somebody going to write it down? Why wouldn't I not say it out loud? And she said, you know, regardless of what you believe, she believes, and I've come to believe, that your body follows your confession. And that if I, you know, build a neural pathway of defeat in my mind, I just won't go there anymore. I'll just write that out of my life and I'll just say, well, I can't do that. I've resigned myself to being restricted, and that's not what I'm able to do anymore. And a lot of it is self-confession. It may not be physically true, but it's what I believe to be true because I've said it so much.
Yeah.
And so what she said, a better thing to do is, at this point in my recovery, I'm not able to do that, but I will be able to do it later. Mm-hmm. And I thought it was you know, at first it was sort of like, what is a new age thing or something? But I think it's true.
I think it's true too.
I think just like you know, the prodigal son is got a picture of himself as a sinning, disgraced disappointment to his father. And his whole journey back home, that's what he characterized himself as being.
Right.
But the reality is that's not true.
Yeah.
And how restricting that is to his enjoyment of life and his fellowship with the believers and the Father. it's just not true.
Right.
So I think it's important to take that governor of confession out of, or to watch it at least, you know, to be, I mean, I tend to, I saw this cartoon one time where people, we were talking, John and I were talking before this session about the pearly gates, and that Peter meets you at this lectern at the pearly gates and interviews you on the way to heaven. And on the gate was a little suggestion box, you know, and and Frank and Ernest, who was the cartoon, was saying, "What the heck is that suggestion box for?" And he said, "Well, some people are not happy unless they're complaining, you know, so we put that there for them."
Yeah.
And it's you know, it was a joke, but it's like complaining is a lifestyle for many people.
Yeah.
And it's not a good governor to carry around. And so that's what I thought of when you talked about putting limits on yourself with self-imposed governor.
Yeah. And I think everybody's prone to these. You going to the gym is a very positive thing. You continuing to engage into relationships. These things are absolutely vital for us. Otherwise, we just kind of, especially as we age, we start to self-eliminate. We eliminate ourselves.
Well, if you eliminate every annoyance in your life, it'll appear, I've found living alone, it'll appear that life is going well. But it's the little annoyances that knock off the rough parts of your life. You know, the iron sharpens iron thing, polishing stones, all of the analogies.
Yeah.
You know, it's like if I don't brush into an abrasive person every now and then, I'll never change. I'll never be better. I'll never give them the joy of knowing me. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
That was a joke, by the way.
Yeah. No, I think everybody likes to know you, Vince. Good thing, Vince, good thoughts. Thank you. Thank you very much. And Jeff, go ahead.
Yeah, my mind went a little bit different direction on this. I didn't kind of grab onto the governor thing, but it says in that statement up there, to know anything, I must let go of what I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and this whole thing was to me about relationship. And so I've got a couple of kind of quasi examples. So if I have to let go not only of what I think, but what I think someone else thinks. You know what I'm saying? Here's what I do.
Yeah,
I get into
that's
an
good.
argument with my wife, and I go, "She's thinking this and that," and I get all mad.
Yeah.
Well, she wasn't thinking that, you know.
Right.
And
Yeah, that's so
and I don't
good.
want to throw my wife under the bus, but here's what she does with our daughter. She's had a stressful and not a great relationship with her mom. And my younger daughter went through a lot of crud in her life, and my wife grabs onto, I don't even know how to describe it, but she asked me the other day, "Would you text Sarah? I've tried to call her, I've tried to text her, and she's just ignoring me." Well, my younger daughter has 5 kids, and she just had a kid a few weeks ago. So she's like homeschooling and very busy and everything. And she's like, "Yeah, but she answers everybody else's texts right away." So she obviously has a problem with me. So that's kind of my wife's thinking. So if she could not only let go of what she's thinking, but not put in her mind what she thinks my daughter is thinking,
Yeah.
then that would help the relationship.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if I manufacture in my head what somebody else is thinking and it becomes negative, then that relationship is injured.
Yeah.
and harmed, if I can not only get away from what I'm thinking, but not try to get into somebody else's head, I think that helps me. And it takes away any kind of animosity that I might have. And it might be that that person is not thinking anywhere close to what I think they're thinking. And I have just done damage to the relationship by giving them their thoughts, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. When you were talking, Jeff, about your wife, which is, I mean, it's not just your wife, it's all of us. But if I think, standing in the shoes of your wife, if I think that my daughter has something against me, I will text back and my text will reflect that. And then
Mhm.
that'll be put on your daughter, who then that just tends to pull her further apart, and anger separate rather than bring together. And it's this extrapolating problem that we're acting on assumptions that we built in our heads. That's what happens.
Well, and it was like what Vince was saying about some people aren't happy unless they're complaining. Some people are wired, and I'm trying not to throw my wife under the bus, but I think she's a little bit wired to think that others have a problem with her, whatever it might be. If somebody doesn't respond to her in a way that she's expecting, then that person obviously
Right.
has a problem with her. And I'm trying to help her navigate that in her life. And I'm not doing a great job of it. I've got to kind of figure out how I can approach this to help her know that, you know, she is awesome.
Yeah.
And that they're, you know, if they don't respond the way you think they're going to respond, it's not you. It might be something totally that you don't even have any idea what's going on with them. So just, you know.
Yeah. I'll tell you what, if you figure that one out, could you let us know?
Yeah.
Jeff, you're not alone.
Yeah.
Just delete YouTube from your computer though, Jeff.
There you go.
Bill.
This is be quick, but you know, over the last 6-8 years, everyone talks about the fracturing of our churches, of our families, of politics, and all these big gaps and stuff. It's nice to know there's a couple attempts out there to bridge the gap. I know Tom Austin at his church is promoting this program called After the Party, which talks about tell people how to open a conversation up that's not contentious. And our church has a book called I Never Realized It That Way, with the same idea. And the book we got is this woman is a daughter of two Mexican immigrants that live in Seattle. And she grew up and became a journalist for a Seattle paper. She's very deeply blue. And during one election, she went up and talked to her parents, and she found out, surprisingly, they voted for Trump, and she hit the roof. And so out of that came this idea of like, I need to understand why people think the way they do or how they think. So this changes it a little bit. I mean, on one hand, we need to change, but on the other hand, we need to not be scared of listening to someone else that they're going to change us. They may or may not, but we got to quit being so worried about letting someone express their deep feelings. I think a lot of us are scared of, I don't want to change, and I don't want you to change me in any way whatsoever. And all that kind of comes together, what you're talking about. These are some pretty good attempts to do it. So there's hope out there.
Let me ask you this, and feel free, Bill, you respond, or if anybody else has. That is a great, this idea of not being afraid to hear what other people think. I think that is a common part of, it's been a common part of my Christian experience. What gives us the ability to allow other people permission to express a differing view, or what is it that needs to occur within me?
Oh boy. And we're scared of giving up certainty. And that's certainty in some areas is good, certainty in other areas. I've changed. I mean, I've changed every 5 years or so. I'm a different person, and
Yeah.
I didn't intend to change. I didn't look for it, but it teaches me that I've got to hold on to some things a little more loosely than I used to hang on to them.
Okay, so loosely hanging on. Jeff and then Totsi. Jeff, go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah.
You've raised your hand.
My thought was the word that came to mind when you were talking about that was humility versus pride. I don't want to engage with somebody that might tell me I'm wrong and I might realize I'm wrong. And so I sometimes don't even engage with somebody that I know has differing views, so that I don't, I'm prideful and I don't want to think to myself, oh, wow, I've been wrong about this for so long.
Yeah.
So I have to come to those type of interactions with some humility and say, I might have been wrong. And what you are saying has merit. And even if I don't agree with you at some point on whatever it is we're talking about, I understand how you could feel that way, and your thoughts have merit. I may even say I still believe what I believe, but having enough humility to say, I don't have to be right and you be wrong. I can still have belief in what I believe, but I can see the merit in what you believe.
Yeah,
And we
good.
can be friends.
Yeah.
So there's Bill letting go, holding things loosely. There's a humility that Jeff is bringing out. Totsi, what are your thoughts?
Well, my thoughts actually go back to when I was growing up. And you guys have heard the story about how, I had this racial inferiority complex. But my sister and my mother at those times would tell me, well, just ignore it. And maybe they were saying this, but what my mom did actually was, these people say all these things about this, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to have, Christ in my life and leading my life, and me witnessing for Christ with my behavior and with what I say and what I do. And so what happened to me was I actually fulfilled those earthly gods in terms of success and popularity and whatever, I achieved all those. So I actually had to be fired in Maine. And I believe to this day that it was God that did that, that allowed that to happen so that I might come to him. And it was a process for me to let go of my stinking thinking. I was actually prejudiced, in my mind. So I had to let go of that. And God had to get me fired in Maine for me to, to really let go of those thoughts. Anyway, that's kind of what I was thinking that.
Yeah. So thanks, Totsi. And another good thought. And I'm, guys, just bear with me here, just trying to, this is really a great discussion about a very meaningful subject. And so I'm trying to correlate and bring together. Your thoughts were, again, the idea of the letting go, which is, what do I need to let go of? And a recognition of the bigger picture. Maybe the question, Totsi, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but there was a time you thought, well, what is God doing through the firing? Or what's the bigger picture? What is there for me to learn here? And you've what do you call it, encapsulated that idea that God is active behind the scenes. There's a bigger picture that you were working out of, a bigger spectrum context, and I think that's helpful too.
Yeah, I
Any other-
actually, I think that actually it wasn't a question of, it was more like he had to take something that was in my mind, like that just totally destroy those earthly gods that I had,
Yeah,
and recognize that those were not the important thing. And it took me up. It wasn't an immediately, recognition on my part. It was those long alone drives between Virginia and Maine,
yeah, yeah,
and always, there's a big influence on me was listening to the tapes of Scott Peck's book, The Road Less Traveled.
huh,
And
yeah.
even though a lot of people don't agree with his theology, there was a lot of things that struck home with me on that. And then it was also the fellowship and home, particularly of the pastor that would just listen to me and not preach at me about what I should do and what was happening to me.
Yeah.
So now that kind of depth that I was in there turns out to me to be my mountaintop of experience, because I don't think I would have ever changed if that hadn't happened to me.
That's so, yeah, the death becomes the mountaintop. That's interesting. We got time for a couple more, John, and then Steve.
Let Steve go first.
Okay, yeah, go ahead, Steve.
Well, I'm sort of, I don't know if you'd call it playing the devil's advocate here. With some of your comments, Bill, about the gaps that exist in thought and the lack of agreement, whether it's church to church or political party to political party, or protests at Columbia University, the Palestinians versus the Jewish anti-Semitism. I feel like there's more than one level here, Mike, with your teaching, the letting go. And I hear us sort of wrestling a little bit with, and challenging ourselves to let go of, the questions having to do with the color of the curtains in the Sunday school room. I don't mean to minimize what we're wrestling with, but it's one thing to do that. I think as a country and as a people, and for me personally, the letting go of things that we feel are threats to, ways of thought that are threats to life itself as we know it here, whether it's the sanctity of human life, or whether we should be able to tamper with God's creation in terms of whether I'm male or female, or 6 or 7 other iterations of that. It's a whole nother challenge to let go of that and say, well, whatever will be, will be. I'm sort of struggling with that in my, how much do I let go of that when it feels like it's going to destroy some level of Maslow's hierarchy, for the way that life is constructed here in this particular era of history. You know what I'm saying?
Well,
There's another discussion here.
well, Steve, let me, because of time, and thank you very much for the, point counterpoint. I think it is really good. Well, then how do I think about these weightier matters? Versus the human default setting of go in with a sawed-off shotgun, both barrels blazing, and say not only no, but hell no. That's what my dad used to say. Maybe call time out and say, how am I thinking about this? And like Bill was saying earlier, what can we do to induce a dialogue? Yes, definite points, and these are very important things, but how do I think about and talk about it? I think that would be a very safe safe avenue of movement. Fellas, I hate to cut it off, but I want to be punctual. It's 8, it's a little after 8. I know there's other thoughts, John, I apologize if we didn't get to hear you. Jeff had a comment as well, but I think we're going to let this go for today. And then we'll pick up. Great discussion today, guys. Really, really good. And thank you very much. And next week will be today's the 24th. I will be here next week. That'll be May 1st. So we'll go ahead and meet next week for week 202 and continue onward at a snail's pace, but onward. Have a good week, guys. See you now. See ya.